Hello, hello, hello. My name is Makai Sharp. I am one of your hosts for Coastal Insight Season 3. I am so excited to be here today. I'm casting from Treaty 6 territory, which encompasses the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and the Métis Nations.
And hi, my name's Emily. I use they or she pronouns, and I am broadcasting from unceded Squamish Nation, from the unceded Squamish territory. We'd like to invite everyone at this time, if you would like to drop the territory that you are watching from in the chat.
Yeah, okay, awesome. So normally we would have a couple classrooms joining us. Today we do not. I'm really excited that in the future we will have some different classes tuning in that are going to be watching from a school setting. But yeah, all right. So welcome to episode 1 of Coastal Insights Season 3. This season is about hope, equity, and advocacy, which, as the title suggests, focuses on those three things in a world changed by the COVID-19 pandemic. So it was a privilege for me to be a part, to be able to host, and then to also be a part of the process to talk about like creating the topics for this season. And to talk about these themes that are relevant to our demographics that we're a part of. So this season is a partnership between Raincoast Conservation and Take a Stand Youth for Conservation. Now, Raincoast is a group of humans, researchers, scientists, and conservationists based on Wasanich territory who are doing incredible work in confronting some of the very real problems facing our diverse ecosystems in the province. And alongside them this season is Take a Stand, an organization that I'm very lucky to be a part of. And Take a Stand's goals are much like Raincoast in the principle of fostering like an informed community. And what I really appreciate about Take a Stand is their focus on motivating and empowering youth to protect the ecosystem through art and film and youth-driven actions, which is something I think is increasingly necessary and powerful, that combination of art and science. So today is the first episode of season 3 of Coastal Insights, and today we have two fantastic guests that we're going to be speaking to. But before we introduce the guest today, I'm going to pass it back to Emily to explain a little more about the theme and today's focus of the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Makai. We today are going to talk about a topic that is on everyone's mind, environmental grief, and importantly, how we can use environmental grief to inspire the much needed action to make a change when it comes to climate change. So just environmental grief is complex, but to me, environmental grief very much follows the 7 stages of grief, which we probably have all heard about before, which can sometimes allude to like the grief that one feels when losing a loved one, when losing a human being, as opposed to an entire biosphere. So there are stages to that grief. There's denial. So we see that in climate denialists all the time. No, climate change isn't happening, or more commonly, it's not that bad. Life goes on, that sort of thing. Then there's anger, which is very evident in many climate movements. And, this is the anger we feel towards institutions. It's anger we feel towards ourselves, society as a whole. There's bargaining. Bargaining can look like, for me, just kind of like, well, maybe if I do this, like maybe if I take this action, or I go to this extreme, or I don't know, recycle 5 cans a day, or whatever it is, like some sort of praise, like maybe if I can just buy an electric car or have fewer children, like whatever. It's just this like feeling of like, there must be something that I can do that can change the course of this. Not to say that there isn't, but there is a very real part in that. And then depression. I've experienced depression definitely because of climate change. It can definitely happen around extreme weather. Smoke in the air, floods, natural disasters can definitely bring on a sense of hopelessness. And then finally, there's acceptance. And acceptance is a complicated one to talk about because climate change is not just like, say, the death of a loved one where there is literally nothing we can do. It's already been done. So just because you accept something doesn't mean you're just going to stand by and watch it happen. But when I begin to accept the full scale of the crisis that is unfolding and how small I am in the scope of that, that's when I begin to feel the most grief. And that's when it can be definitely the most sad and scary. Another thing that you experience when it comes to environmental grief is eco anxiety. A fun little one for you. So in 2017, the American Psychiatric Association described eco anxiety as a chronic fear of environmental doom. So that's a fun one. And it's something that I think a lot of young people experience, and I have definitely experienced. And anxiety can definitely fall in the stages of grief. So today we are going to be talking to two specialists about environmental grief, eco anxiety, what we can do about it. We're going to talk to Gabrielle Gilderman, who's a climate organizer and spiritual care practitioner. And we're going to talk to Jennifer Mervin, who's a psychologist who has a specialty with working with crisis reduction. We're going to talk to them about climate grief, eco anxiety, ways we can safely hold those feelings and use them to take action that feels good and does good. So now I'm going to pass it back to Makai, and we're going to introduce our first guest, Gabrielle.
Yeah, and so quickly before we do introduce Gabrielle, I just wanted to say that comparison between, climate grief and, the death of like an individual or like a loved one, it seems such on the opposite side of the spectrum. We have like this tiny in like one individual person versus like this big existential, ecosystem, the planet. And, it's kind of hard to the mental gymnastics of something so great and huge, and yet like the human condition applies to both of those things. We both go through the same stages for both, the death of ecosystems, the death of species, and the death of, someone close to us. And it's so true, with every stage, denial, bargaining, it's there, and it's, I think that's a incredible comparison. So anyway, without further ado, I am so excited to introduce our first guest today. It's Gabrielle Gilderman. Gabrielle is an organizer and co-founder of Climate Justice Edmonton, and currently is working as a spiritual care practitioner or a chaplain in both hospital and social movement settings. And last year, while completing a Master of Theological Studies, she conducted thesis research on climate grief in young organizers. The most unexpected application of her work thus far has been the memes she's been making and sharing about climate grief and healing on her social media. So I'm going to bring Gabrielle into the stream. Hello.
Gabrielle.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me.
How's it going? How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Your guys' intro was great. I feel like I learned some things. It's really nice.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Is there any, did I miss anything in your introduction? Is there anything else?
Introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about what chaplaincy is. I think a lot of people aren't really familiar with chaplains, which is really fair.
Yeah.
I work in a hospital. I'm in my office right now. Chaplains historically work in like public institutions, providing spiritual care outside of churches or faith communities. So in prisons, hospitals, universities, in the military, homeless shelters will sometimes have chaplains. So I kind of think of our work as giving that kind of spiritual, emotional care to people who are in a time of transition in their life or a time of grief and loss. And especially in like modern society, providing that care when many people are not part of faith communities anymore, and thus don't have like a spiritual leader that they can go to when they're asking these big existential questions about the meaning of life and about suffering. So that's where we come in. I'm really lucky and doing this work in the hospital. Most of the time I'm working with patients who aren't religious, don't consider themselves religious. So it's a lot of conversations about like the meaning of life and why they're here and how to keep going when things feel impossibly difficult. And yeah, I came to this work in a bit of a roundabout way. I never thought I would end up as a chaplain. I was raised religious, but and my dad is actually a chaplain, but I never thought I'd get into it because
No way.
Yeah, it's a family business.
Okay, because I was going to ask you, like, how did you come into this work?
Yeah. So I just never thought I was spiritual enough to be a chaplain. I was always intrigued by my dad's work. He always told me it was the best job in the world, but I also was had a lot of frustration with the Christian tradition and the Christian church, and didn't really feel comfortable aligning myself with it until I went through my own experience of climate grief in a pretty intense way. And it coincided with like my own mental health struggles as well, around depression and anxiety. And it felt like it all kind of came to a point over one summer. And it kind of felt like the political and scientific worldviews that I'd been previously like finding meaning in were falling apart, and they weren't actually like big enough to give me a sense of meaning or comfort in the face of such atrocity and such suffering and such uncertainty. So I actually, kind of had this return to my spiritual roots and the tradition of Christianity. And of course, there's still a lot of wrestling and struggle within that. But I found, spirituality to give a home to those kinds of big existential questions in a way that other ideologies couldn't. And then lastly, I kind of saw a need for it. I'm an organizer and was part of a community of activists and organizers, and just saw how much grief there was and how much numbness, really. Like, people didn't have a space to talk about their grief, including myself. So I kind of thought, maybe there's room for like the spiritual side of this work and the political side of this work. And so now I do some work within social movements, providing spaces for people and activists to dig into some of those questions.
It's an interesting intersection, because it's like so much of climate change is presented as a scientific thing, the climate crisis, environmentalism, a lot of it is built on top of scientific facts. And I can see, I mean, even for myself or people, how they might have some hesitancy around leaning in towards more of a spiritual aspect. It can almost feel like, I mean, like, my first reaction is it almost seems like sort of almost like a defeat. It's like, oh gosh, like I can't handle with this anymore. I can't deal with it. I have nowhere to go to. So you go to spirituality, which is, for someone like myself who's agnostic, might feel like a bit of almost like a bit of like a cop out or something like that, in a way of being like, well, it's just like I can't handle the truth, so I'm going to go to something which can't be proven, right? So
Totally.
I'm wondering, like, what is your response to that? Like, how do you sort of justify spirituality in this sense?
I don't think it replaces any like scientific or political worldview or the action that's needed on both of those levels. Like, I think it adds just like another dimension, in my view, a deeper dimension to the reality of the climate crisis. Not in a way that there's a term called spiritual bypassing, which pretty much means using spirituality as a way to bypass emotion or bypass, fear, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so religion can be used in that way. Absolutely. It's a way for people to avoid reality sometimes. But I think lots of things can be used as a way to avoid reality. Humans are very good at that.
Yeah.
And so, like anything, spirituality can also, can be used in a harmful way or in a life-giving way that helps us actually face reality. You were talking about that, Emily, about like how hard it is, and you feel the most grief when you actually have to face the entirety, the scope of the reality of the climate crisis. And I feel like spirituality gives us a grounding and a sense of being held and connected to whatever. It doesn't have to be God. It could be the world, could be a community. But it gives us that container and that feeling of being held that allows us to actually.
You're sort of saying, you're sort of saying that, like, the spirituality can sort of, like you're saying, can be the thing that holds us and supports us, and doesn't necessarily shelter us or give us the spiritual bypassing to dodge reality, but can actually help us as we face reality, that can protect us as we face it, give us the strength to go forward in it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think like give people the strength to do the political work and do like scientific work, which both of those, engaging with the climate crisis on either a political or scientific level, is incredibly difficult to maintain because it's so horrifying. And you see a lot of burnout in those areas. You see a lot of, I see activists and I'm sure scientists as well, but I don't work with them, just feeling so numb and so disconnected because they have to, because it's too hard to actually hold the emotions and they don't have a support system. Yeah.
So Go ahead, Makai.
I was just gonna say, so like in your work, with the people that you do work with, how do you see environmental grief and anxiety directly affecting people's lives?
Yeah, in huge ways. If you want to bring up those slides, I can use those to. I
Yes.
have a couple
Okay.
memes.
1 second. Yes. Okay. Here
I
is.
think of. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. Hello.
This is one of my favorite memes. And this goes to what we were talking about just before this, about avoiding reality. Like, I think the impact of climate grief makes people terrified to face reality. And like you both were saying, like there's a lot of denial. And if it's not literal denial, it's emotional denial. And when I see this picture too, I think of this like, it can lead, so yeah, I feel like it can either lead to like a hyperactivation or a hypoactivation of our nervous
Sure.
systems. So a hyperactivation would be like anxiety, feeling like racked with anxiety all the time, would be like anger. In this case, like running away or like using work or organizing work as a distraction. You're constantly keeping yourself busy so you don't actually have to feel the emotions or face the reality. And then if you go to the next slide, there's the hypo activation. So in this meme, there's like a looming figure, our fascio-capitalist dystopian reality, and then this kid that's just like in denial. Me wondering why someone didn't text me back. Very relatable.
Honestly, hilarious. Oh, that's so true. That's so true.
Yeah. So that kind of like denial, avoidance. There's kind of this like tunnel vision, a little bit of like, I can't think about the outside world. I'm just going to like focus on whatever's in front of me. But the problem is your anxiety about what's behind you, about that looming reality, that anxiety doesn't go away just because you're not facing it. It just manifests into whatever's in front of you, which is like our phones and our relationships and our schoolwork. And people get have a generalized anxiety about whatever is going on in their life. And then,
it's okay if I ask a question here. So like everything you're saying like hits home for me. I don't know about Makai, but
no, absolutely.
It hits home. Like the hyperarousal, I feel that. Oh my gosh, the hypo around the sort of the numbness or checking out. Like for me, I feel like it's really almost hard to engage in environmental work sometimes because I'm worried. Oh no, I'm going to go to that place of hyperarousal. I'm gonna shut down. I'm gonna check out, and I'm not going to be able to deal with it.
It definitely, it makes it more like polarizing our emotions. It's not as regulated. It's either end of the spectrum of extreme. Like we're either like really like or we're like I can't even look. I have to turn off my phone because it's just
it's too much. Like I delete Twitter. I'm like I can't deal with it anymore. Just extreme.
Were you gonna ask a question? Because I was also gonna ask a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Yeah, I'll ask a question. You can ask a question. We have so many questions. So this is good. It's very good. So my question is, I think a fear I have, and I don't, my sense is it's probably unjustified, but the fear I have is that if I learn more emotional regulation around these feelings, I'm not going to do anything because I'm gonna get to this place of being like, oh, the climate crisis, and I'm just gonna be like, and just like not care anymore. Right. So I feel like I almost like, which is probably unsustainable, but I feel like I almost depend, or I worry that I need to use that hyperarousal as like a clutch. To
like fuel.
To fuel it. So I'm just wondering, in your experience, how does processing these emotions and maybe holding space for them in a healthier way, like how does that affect the activism that people do?
Yeah.
In the long term.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if I can speak to the long term because I still feel new to the work. For myself, it like definitely deepened my capacity to do this work in the long term. In the short term, you can sometimes feel like you're just like unraveling and falling apart. And I hear that in some activists. They're like, I can't afford to just, take 2 weeks or 2 months to stop organizing and deal with my emotions. Like I just don't have time. I need to keep grinding, keep going. I think some people can process emotion while still doing work, while still doing organizing work on the side, and other people it makes more sense to like put some of the more active stuff to the side and focus more on the emotions. yeah, I would say the thing is, okay, I explained it this way once, is like what brings us into organizing and activism work is love, is this desire for transformation, a love of the world, a love of people, and a compassion and a pain when we see other people suffer, right? The problem is it's hard to stay connected to that love because it's an open-hearted, painful place, and so we often disconnect from that love and we start organizing out of a place of anxiety, and we use the anxiety to fuel us, and it works for a while, and it's like, honestly, we do what we need to do, right? Like, I think, like, it also gets stuff done. It really does. I'm not saying it's like all bad. It's not. But you'll burn out. Like, you can't sustain that. And sometimes burnout is a good thing because it forces you to like reassess and figure out something better or something deeper than just the anxiety. So I think grieving, whatever that process looks like, or finding that spiritual practice that helps you connect to something deeper, reconnect to that love, it's going to help you sustain the work over the long term, because activism is you're just going to lose again and again. Like, I was an organizer, and you just encounter failure after failure, especially like in terms of what you expect. You expect a certain kind of success or a certain win, and you're not going to see it in the way you expect. And so how do you learn to deal with that? Like, you need to find something deeper, which doesn't mean you don't do the work, but it just means your sense of identity, your sense of purpose isn't just reliant on this win cycle or this feeling of like,
the win cycle.
I need to see the outcomes of my work. I need to,
Yeah. Well, what I was going to ask is, like you said, reconnecting. And what I wanted to ask you was, how should young people be repurposing these feelings of anxiety and grief towards our future? How should, through like your work, what often elicits like a change in attitude to that uncertainty?
I think shared spaces for grief, for honest like sharing of how people feel. There aren't a lot of spaces, even organizing spaces. I organized for years, and it wasn't until something really intense happened that for the first time ever, I was like in a space with friends of mine that I had organized with for years. We were crying together for the first time. And we finally had this space where we could be honest. And it was like all of this emotion came out about how afraid we were for the future and how much grief we had. And it was amazing to me that we had spent so much time together and that had never had a space to move, right? So I think whether you're an organizer or not, it's important to create intentional shared spaces to be honest about how you feel. And that can look like a bunch of different things, but that's what I've seen to be like transformative for people.
So sort of like what I'm hearing is like, when we are able to sort of make these spaces to actually process how we're feeling, not just kind of, because activism can be a very clever way to actually dodge experiencing reality, because we feel like we're actually facing it, but we're like, we're also not. And also I find like sometimes in activism, our inability to connect with love and be grounded in what we're doing can do a huge disservice to us, because we're not actually looking at all the variables when it comes to organizing. So sometimes we can make hasty, rash decisions based on anxiety, instead of thinking maybe it would be more strategic or better if we went like this direction. So I'm sort of hearing like being able to make space for the anxiety can allow us to process it, feel it, and then from there being able to reconnect with why we're doing this in the first place, what's driving us, and then from there we can actually move forward in a more loving, sustainable, and probably more engaging and an attractive place to do activism from.
That totally makes sense too. Like, I think it's so empowering when you learn that what you're going through isn't alone. It's shared experiences. That's so healing in itself. You're like, oh, I'm not the only person who has all these feelings. And it just kind of humanizes what you're going through. So that makes total sense. Cool.
Yeah. And speaking of that, like, to me, that's the biggest, thing we're working towards is we're trying to bring ourselves and each other out of places of isolation and out of places of alienation. Like when you asked me before, what's the biggest impact on people's day-to-day lives of climate grief, is it feels really isolating. People, their friends and family maybe don't understand why they're feeling so intense about this. And that's so, you feel like you're living in a different reality than other people. You feel disconnected. And honestly, life doesn't have to be that way. We live in a society that purposefully like alienates us from each other and isolates us, alienates us from our relationship to land, relationship to our bodies. So this process of healing is a process of actually like creating the community and the world we want. And Emily, you kind of referred to this, like we do healing work and grief work so that we can like move into communities of more collective experience, so that we can actually like hold each other in more like in more honest ways. And that's like healing personally, and it's like strategic in terms of our political work. We're not trying to just like tinker around the edges and like change a couple things about society. It's like capitalism is causing the climate crisis, and we need to like transform our communities and our society. We do that by healing, right?
And the first way to transform a community is to create a community, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
I just have, sorry, Makai, go ahead.
No, I agree. I totally agree. Go ahead, Emily.
I just have like one question that's really burning, and then I think we're gonna have to start to wrap up.
Is it the question?
Just a burning question I have, which is you're talking about a connection to land. I mean, this is not the baby segment.
It's not? Okay, we're not doing that? Okay.
We're gonna get there. And this is one question. I'm being selfishly asking this question here. But like as quickly as you can answer this big question is like how do you think, if you have any experience with this, how can we continue to enhance our connection to land, like a spiritual connection to land, even though we know we're losing so much land and that land is being transformed?
Ooh, a quick question, or quick answer. I don't know. I think especially for settlers, like a big piece of it is like interrogating and reckoning with your relationship with land as a settler, which I think people feel like, oh, that's going to be like, I'm going to feel guilty all the time if I try and work on my relationship with land from the perspective of being a settler. And there's definitely hard parts to it. Like, for example, myself looking back at my ancestors and who were farmers, and they settled land and like got a parcel of land for $5 that was like stolen land, and then farmed it. And it's like me grappling with the reality of that and what it means for me and my family and my life now is difficult and painful. It's facing the same kind of difficult reality that we mentioned about before, but it can also be deeply healing because it gives you this sense. I think some settlers feel like they're not allowed to feel connected to land. They're not allowed to believe that the land loves them or that they belong. And in my view, everyone has a birthright to feeling really connected to land and to feeling held and loved by it, but it takes work, especially in a colonized society, to figure out what that means for you. And practically, I think it really just looks like spending time outside as much as you can and like learning about the land that you're on and the animals and the plants and learning from them. Robin Wall Kimmerer wrote a really beautiful book that talks about this, Braiding Sweetgrass, which I highly recommend. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to quickly move on to our maybe baby.
You're going to ask it, Emily.
Segment.
I'm going to put it up.
Yeah.
All right.
Maybe babies. Should we have babies? Maybe.
Should we have babies?
Maybe. The climate is, the planet's burning. Social collapse is gonna happen. Fingers crossed, baby. What should we have babies? Gabrielle, what are your thoughts?
Oh boy. Yeah, should we? A big question. I hear it a lot. I love babies. I don't judge anyone for having a baby. I think what I encourage is for people to like engage with the question. And I don't know, to me, there's something really like beautiful and hopeful about having a child, and like it's such a statement of like investing in the future, and it can be really, really hard. I think parents feel climate grief in a different way, but I don't know. It's like we need, like we're building a world for somebody. Like we're transforming the world for the next generation. And yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of like thoughts and feelings about it, but
Maybe.
Well,
I'm getting your answer to maybe babies is maybe.
maybe.
It's like if
what,
it's
what do you think about the logic behind young people being uncertain about wanting to have kids, though? Because that's really where that question stems from. Because that's
Yeah.
where it's so real for, you know, people to be uncertain about the future due to climate change. Like,
Mm-hmm.
do we want to bring more lives into the world to contribute to it, but also to suffer from it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, are those feelings valid, or is it just kind of unfounded?
No, I think it's absolutely valid. Yeah. But sometimes I think of like people in war-torn countries who had kids, you know, it's like
Yeah.
people were living have throughout all of human history have been living in times of incredible uncertainty. And I do think the climate crisis is different because it's so global and so huge, but regardless, like people always had kids in the face of certain suffering. Like you have a kid 100 years ago and you knew it was going to suffer a lot. That's what it means to be alive. So in some regard, I think the climate crisis adds a whole nother layer to it. But yeah, I don't. This is a philosopher answer that doesn't say yes or no, but
well, that's how
maybe.
it is. That's why the
Yeah.
segment's called Maybe Babies and not
Yeah.
definitely babies.
Totally.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I think we might have to wrap it up.
Yeah, as I was gonna say, on
Now.
that note, thank you so much, Gabrielle. If anyone who's watching on Facebook or YouTube has any questions, we will have a little Q&A at the end with the time that we have remaining. So please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and then we will look back up and have those ready for Gabrielle later in the
Yeah,
episode.
thank you so much for coming. I like want to be your best friend now. That is
Yes.
awesome.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, this was a great conversation. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
we'll talk to you in a little bit.
Sounds good.
Bye, thank you. All right, so now we have our second guest. Emily, I will let you introduce.
Yeah, this is a little blurb I got about Jennifer. Dr. Jennifer Mervyn is a registered psychologist offering individual, family, and group counseling and mental health treatment. She has an extensive background in trauma, substance abuse, and utilizes innovative, culturally informed, and therapeutic approaches in her work. She consults, teaches, and trains on trauma-informed practice and policy across multiple sectors, including policing, education, and healthcare nationwide. But don't hear it from me. Let's talk to Jennifer herself. Let's bring her on.
Jennifer, hello.
Hello.
Hello, Jennifer. I love your earrings, first of all. They're really they're beautiful.
These were made by an elder in Tsawwassen First Nation, who I'm coming from today on Kwantlen, Tsawwassen, and Semiahmoo First Nation territory.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here.
Is there anything you would like to tell us about yourself before we get into the questions?
Do we have any slides, Makai?
So yeah, so I did try once again to get those ready, but I never actually received them in the end. So unfortunately not.
You're gonna have to describe the slides for us.
Yeah.
Sure, I will describe some of the slides. No worries at all. I guess you sort of summed it up. Definitely my area of interest and passion is neuroscience of trauma and resilience. And I come by that quite honestly. So it's not just professional for me, but it's definitely personal. So I'm Métis with my ancestral ties to Red River. And definitely my family's been impacted by intergenerational trauma. And it was really important for me as a young person to figure out what we could do to be building better resilient individuals, families, and communities. And so I started looking at sort of the different aspects of trauma as it related to toxic stress and how it impacts people. So it definitely will play a part of our conversation today and what you guys have already spoken about. So much of what you guys have already talked about has touched my heart in kindred ways. So
awesome.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
We can get it. We can get into those spicy little questions, which I'm currently. Oh yeah, I'll start with this one.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we sort of touched on this earlier, but the sort of hyperarousal and hypoarousal, or maybe how it looks more practically is being like, oh my god, climate change. Oh my god, everyone's gonna die. Oh my god, I'm gonna die. Oh my god, like freaking out, like literally, and then just like, no, I'm not gonna go to work today. I'm just gonna sit in my bed. This is awful. And so there's that end of the spectrum, and then there's like the part where you're just like, I'm just gonna focus on the time that Will Smith slapped Chris Rock, because that was really funny. And I don't really want to think about anything else, including how Jason Kenney made a meme about that. It was so, did you guys see that meme? It was like, Jason Kenney, like, sorry, I'm kind of diverging, but he like posted a meme where it's like Chris Rock is like green policy and Will Smith is reality. And I'm like, sorry. Anyway, I'm cycling back to the hyperarousal now. But basically there's these two polar extremes where you have like super, oh my God, everything sucks, everything's gonna die. And then there's like totally checking out. And I feel like there's a Goldilocks zone in the middle where you're able to actually do activist work. I was wondering, as a psychologist, if you could maybe talk about some strategies that can increase our resilience and help us stay in that zone without burnout.
Yeah. So let me talk a little bit about, so you were talking about, I talked to police, I talked to educators, different people about trauma. And I think if you understand it through this toxic stress lens, maybe it can make more sense in terms of how we look at how we stay in that resilient zone and at our best selves instead of being hypo or hyper aroused. So when I talk about trauma, I use it interchangeably with toxic stress. So you can have 3 different types of stress, right? Positive stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress. So positive stress is like, being here, being, online today, knowing that we're alive. I'm going to have some positive stress. So like right now, if I look at my Fitbit, my heart's probably going to be beating a little more faster than it would be if I'm normally just right, Makai? So you can have like you have like that little bit of like, oh, I've got to perform, I'm on pressure, answer the questions, remember the stuff that's in my head, that kind of stuff. I'll have also some small increases in my stress hormones today with you guys, just because, it's not just like the calm every day sitting in the backyard in the sunshine. Sun's so beautiful out today, but it's not one of those things. It's a situation that's going to cause me to have some changes in my biochemistry, in my brain, and the stress hormones that I emit today. So, and that's okay, because that actually helps us perform well. So we have positive stress, hopefully, in times like when we're running races, taking tests, speaking publicly. These are types of things that we should be undergoing some sort of positive stress. What can happen is that there's stressors in life that can become a lot more impactful, right, on our brain and our biology, where it's not just mild elevations in stress hormones. It's not just mild muscle tension or mild elevations in our heart rate, but where like our whole body undergoes a significant amount, where you've basically engaged your fight or flight system, your parasympathetic nervous system. And it says, guess what, guys, it's go time. Your heart starts pumping wildly to get these stress hormones to all different areas of our muscle groups, our body. Cardiovascular endurance is increased, right? And what happens over time is we need that stress response. So, if I open my door right now and there is, a robber at my door, I need to have that to be able to fight him or get the heck away from him. Like we need that fight or flight response. But what we don't need is that fight or flight engaged at that level, that kind of intensely hyper aroused level on a daily basis. But our thoughts can actually do that to us, right? If we are stressing about climate change, if we are in that complete level of hyperarousal on a day-to-day basis, for they say about 6 weeks or more, it actually has the capacity to change where our baselines are at. So our heart isn't going to come back down to its normal beating level. It's going to stay because it remembers this is where it's supposed to be. So instead of 65 or 70, if I'm every day waking up flooded with fear about what's happening in our environment and I can't bring my baseline back down, then it's going to remember to be beating at 99, 100, 100. Yeah. It's not going to, right? That's where our whole system actually gets recalibrated and reset. And that's the danger, because that's where it becomes toxic. When we stay engaged like that, it actually becomes toxic too. And let me tell you guys, like under the age of 25, your brain is the most susceptible to having changes happen on a neurochemical level, but even a structural level. So the actual structures inside your brain, some of them will grow too big, some of them will shrink and not reach their fullest volume or capacity in the face of toxic stress.
Oh, great. So now we got to worry about climate change, and we also got to worry about how climate change is going to fucking, sorry, I was gonna screw with us 5 years down the line mentally. If I gotta die from climate change, or am I gonna die from like cancer caused by climate change? Anxiety.
And
Great.
what
I
I'm
don't
hoping,
know.
what I'm hoping the message is going to be is that you're going to worry a little less. You're going to actually do a little bit more self-care. You're going to actually listen to your body. And actually, one of the cool things I think we can talk about eventually is that, like, you know, it's actually our natural environment that can heal that in us, that can recalibrate our stress response systems. I mean, that is the crazy message of today. It's the most beautiful thing. When I talk about this, even if I'm talking about things like the impacts of residential school, the traumas that are endured by families that are suffering through poverty or abuse and things like that. Guess what? The answer is the same. Get out into nature, recalibrate your nervous system, bring down your blood pressure, your muscle tension, that heart rate by being immersed in what we have at our fingertips. And that is nature and our natural environment. And we still have so much to celebrate here. We truly, truly do. So I think there's a lot that can be infused with hope and with gratitude. So just looping it all the way back. So thinking about positive stress. Tolerable stress is when we are faced with what's potentially toxic stress to our brains, but what makes it tolerable is that it is buffered by caring, connected relationships in our lives with people that we can vent to, get this stuff off our chest, come together with like-minded individuals and say, and what are we going to do about this? How are we going to make these changes? How are we going to fight together? How are we going to stand up? What are we going to do to breathe meaning and purpose into creating some sustainable change? And have that drive you, because that's what's going to keep that toxic stress tolerable. And it doesn't have to be toxic to your brain and your body. And you're not going to have to.
Beautiful.
Isn't that beautiful?
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
The place where I both see community coming together to address these things, but also the place where I find myself being reminded of the anxiety that puts me back into that place of a fast heart rate is social media. So within the context of, you know, climate anxiety, do you think social media is a good thing for young people? Because it allows us to, you know, come together, you know, to talk about our lived experiences, but it's also like the headlines that are like, we have 30 years before every glacier is gone, you know, like Florida's going to be underwater. So it's like stuff like that, you know, when it's kind of a mixture of both. I think it definitely like emphasizes that polarization and emotion, but is it bad? Is it good? What do you think, as you know, from your background?
It's a blessing and a curse. I mean, I personally, it's one of my things that because I avoid it a little bit because I see the impacts, I think, on the people that I support. I see how much anxiety it creates in them. That's why I didn't see your meme, Emily. I didn't see the funny Chris Rock meme because I really try to engage with it in such a limited capacity. So I have a Dr. Jennifer Mervin Instagram account that I would love to post more because I think it helps. There's some good things that can really help people. So it's my commitment to doing more through social media. And yet, man, do we need to really create some serious boundaries about how much time we end up engaging with it. And especially, I mean, what do we learn through the pandemic? People who went on and learned more about COVID during that pandemic and were constantly infiltrated with what was going on in the media, they suffered worse. So we know that there's some good research there that says, you know, there is too much for us. We need to actually really set limits around it, screen time limits, all that kind of good stuff, because it's actually not screens that we're finding buffers toxic stress, guys. It's the natural environment. So
and also, like, if I can, I think maybe we were talking before with our conversation with Gabrielle, like something that's really healing is like conversations like these where this isn't like social media, where we're literally just talking about our feelings. And this is community that we're building with the viewers and with ourselves, with everyone. I think maybe like community isn't the issue. It's like social media itself and like the algorithms, which have a tendency to show us things that trigger our stress response to keep us engaged.
And as soon as you start to engage one of those fear responses, it's like a chain reaction that shows up in your feed. And that is so hard on the heart and the soul. So there's different ways I think we can disengage those algorithms, right? So like if you're looking for scenes of nature and natural beauty and environmental hope, like it's thinking about how we're searching for these things, because that's also going to be you know, what's brought to us in our social media. So we need to be careful about how we engage with it. But I don't think throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't think the answer is to not engage at all. I think it's about engaging carefully.
I have another question for you. As settlers, I would like to know how engaging with Indigenous people and lifting Indigenous people up and giving them the opportunity and platform to advocate for what they believe in for what we know is right is so incredibly important. How can settlers, such as myself, engage with indigenous communities as mindfully as possible so we don't create trauma or perpetuate trauma? I was wondering if you had any sort of advice as someone who's worked in those communities and is a part of those communities. What are some things that we can do that can help indigenous communities?
That's a great question. And I think like I'm going to humbly answer it to the best of my ability, but I definitely do not, propose that I speak on behalf of all indigenous people or what would be in everyone's best interest. So humbly, I think from my own experience, I think I really do believe that we should give indigenous people, like even in my talks and training, what heals our brain and the understanding of trauma and healing practices, like what we're repackaging now and saying, guess what, guys, we're doing. Someone posted the other day actually on social media about gentle parenting practices. And they're like, hang on, those are indigenous parenting practices. And you're just repackaging it yourself. So I think to give the respect where it's due. And I really do believe like, I think all around the world, because this is a global issue, we do need to respect and understand that indigenous people have always been revered as our best environmentalists and conservationists, right? They're the ones who absolutely they're our greatest botanists. They know they're the animal behavior experts, and they've been the conservators of the land all over. I mean, land rights really are about conserving our natural resources. So I think as long as we are working in collaboration and paying the respect that is due, we have so much to learn from indigenous. They're the ones who are saying, let's protect our land, our animals, and our resources from the get-go. This is what land rights is about. So I think if we start from that place of cultural humility and be open to understanding, to me, that's always where we need to be. I think there's a lot of discussion about like, how do I develop cultural competency? And no matter if we're talking about environmentalism or we're talking about working in business, I don't believe in cultural competency. I believe in cultural humility. I don't think you are ever getting to this like destination of I'm culturally competent now. I know how I'm going to be able to work with indigenous people. Possible.
Yeah.
Can we all just be humble? Can we all just take a step back and be like, wow, big stuff is happening to our world. And how are we going to work together? I truly also believe when you talk about like what is going to help us not engage in that hypoarousal or hyperarousal, so we're not depressed and we're not anxious, what are we going to be able to do to make any sort of meaningful change? Well, it's purpose and meaning, guys. So like, how are we going to be able to work together purposefully and meaningfully and engage in something that actually bonds us and brings us together in terms of to save some of this? To me, that's where the healing is gonna begin. It's gonna start to come together. But we need cultural humility to begin from that place and that platform before we're gonna get anywhere. So as soon as we start being like, I'm the expert here and I'm the expert there, and we all just come together humbly, I think that's the most beautiful place of growth, right?
Yeah. And I think in like environmentalism mainstream, a lot of the stuff that I think Makai and I we're inundated with growing up is sort of this idea of like, we have to meet this CO2 emission target by this date and this year. And it's this very structured regiment thing. And I think that's incredibly, incredibly important for obvious reasons. But then it's also like, what is the purpose and meaning that we are building beneath that? Like, what are we fighting for in a larger context? Exactly. And I think what you're talking about in terms of building that community and taking the institution out of environmentalism and transforming it into something that's about community and growth and purpose and love, like that is very powerful.
And making things tangible.
Yeah.
Not making it like, how do we just reduce the temperature of the planet? We can't just like flip a switch.
Yeah.
Through that, conversation, learning, educating, being a part of the process, making it more tangible, making it more real than just these huge objectives that are so beyond us as individuals.
And that's very capitalist, I think, a little bit in itself. Not to dismiss them or say that we shouldn't strive for them, because we should, but it's like, the idea of like, we're just going to hit these limits in 2050 and 2030, like if it takes the soul out of what we're fighting for, and I think bringing the soul will only serve us. And I think
it also helps feed into that, like overwhelm, that state of overwhelm where you're hypo or hyper aroused, because it feels too big and too nebulous and too far away and too, not tangible. And I let's look at like, what are some of the basic tenets of mental health treatment and wellness and healing? Let's come back to the gratitudes. Like, what are we thankful for? What did we manage to do today? What did we accomplish today? This conversation is like, I have so much gratitude, and this is just a conversation. It's just raising awareness. It's just addressing people's feelings and concerns. And we haven't like tackled anything necessarily environmentally, but this conversation to me gives me a heart full of gratitude that this is a place of growth and learning, and something really cool could happen here. And people can hear this and be inspired and maybe be motivated to engage and be a part of something where they might otherwise feel so overwhelmed that they wouldn't engage. So
that's really cool. And on that topic, it's time for
dun dun dun.
Babies. Should we have babies?
He's having kids in the face of climate.
Oh my God, the planet's on fire. Jeez. Oh my God, 3 degrees. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Should we have kids?
No more trees?
I don't know if we should.
Babies.
That sounds like a bad idea.
Jennifer, what do you think?
What do you think?
Babies.
So I think it's an individual's personal, I think, endeavor to really decide. I have people that I support that just have decided not to, right? And I love and support them for their decision. I definitely, like, if you're asking me personally, we consider babies to be medicine. So there is something amazing that happens in your brain. Like, you actually secrete oxytocin, right? So like all the feel-good healing chemicals of our brain can be achieved by holding a baby, but it doesn't have to be yours. It could be someone else's. So yeah, so I mean, I think it's someone's personal decision, really. I would support people either way in the choices that they make, but I do understand why people are so concerned right now, given everything and given overpopulation, right? So I respect feelings on both sides completely. And I'm a mom of 3, so we'll just throw that out there.
And so babies, maybe, but also babies medicine.
Yeah,
Babies
are medicine.
Yeah.
Listen,
well, it's just one of those things that creates more love, right, in the world. So I think that's a cool way to look at it for sure. But thank you, Jennifer.
Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with us. We have around just under 8 minutes left, so I'm going to bring Gabrielle back in. But before I do, I just want to invite everyone who's watching, if you have any questions, we're just going to kind of open it up to anyone on Facebook and YouTube that has been watching and is curious about literally anything. Just feel free to send the questions in the chat and we can have a look at those right now. So I'm going to add Gabrielle back in. Hello, Gabrielle. There we go. Cool. Sorry. This is StreamYard, this application that we're using to stream today, and I'm just kind of getting used to the UI of everything, so I apologize. All right, so 1 second. I'm just going to pull up the chat.
Good chat though today, guys. That was awesome. That was healing for me. I mean, whew, I'm happy. This is good. I'm going to take some of the stuff that you guys talked about, both of you, and I'm going to carry it with me. And also, I'm going to follow you on Instagram, Jennifer.
Yes. Well, I guess while we wait, because I'm not seeing anything quite yet, I wanted to ask both of you, what are some final things that you guys would like to conclude on, that you would want to share with like just a general audience about the conversation we had today? If anything.
I'll just add, I think there was a question you asked Gabrielle at the end there in terms of like, well, what can people do in this state where everything feels really big? What can we do? Like, what sort of small and I think it's really important that we feel like we can do something, that we make a difference. I believe that every single person has the capacity to make a difference, right? It's these little ripples that will eventually come together. And I guess one of my own personal teachings has always been that what we do it with intention. And so my son and I will, we smudge most mornings, right? And what do? So got the 4 elements of the earth, right? So we have a shell that represents water, we have the medicines that represent land, we light it with fire, and then we have a feather to represent the air. So we've got all 4 elements of our natural environment. And then we wash our eyes so that we see good in this world today, that we see hope, that we see possible change for our future. We wash our ears so that we hear good things about ourselves and about this world, and we hear good, positive, hopeful things. Our mouths so that we speak truth and kindness to others, uplifting, hopeful messages. Our hearts so that we love deeply and truly. You know, our bodies, our feet, our legs, that we walk on the right red road, on the good path of spirituality. And I think for me, it's so about like setting our intentions for our day. So like when I'm down at the beach and my son wants to bring a pebble home, he wants to bring a rock home that he loves, and it's really important to him. He can't do that without first offering a little, offering of tobacco. He has to replace that because we're taking something from nature, and he's got to think about, do I really need that? What am I going to use it for? How important is that to me? And we're going to thank the creator for putting it there in the first place and offer that offering and taking it. And so no matter what we do, the footprint that we leave, right, what we do on this land, I think it's so incredibly important that we're doing it with that mindset, that we're not leaving anything behind that might hurt anybody, and that we're not taking anything that might hurt anyone in that natural environment. And so that living with such specific intention has really transformed, I think, my life and myself as a mom. And my kids, because I hear them talking to their friends about certain things of what you can take and what you can't take. And, I remember the teaching with another mom, and her child was stepping on ants. And she says, all my relations, you can't kill those ants. We are all connected. Those are living creatures. All my relations, right? Those are your cousins down there. Don't you dare step on them. And I love that, because I think if we all were just even a little bit more intentional in our lives, and even me, I'm not perfect, right? Like I make mistakes all the time, and my children will remind me of the teachings that I've given to them. I think that, man, if we all just did a little bit, like how amazing would things really be if we were just a little bit more intentional with how we engage with our environment.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
That was amazing. Well, we only have like 3 minutes left, and I want to make sure both of you have an opportunity to plug. So if you guys have a website, if you guys have social media, I do have Gabrielle's website here already. Jennifer, do you have a website?
I do. It's drjennifermervin.com.
Okay. 1 second. I will put that up. And then do either of you have social media?
Yeah, I can. People can follow me on Instagram. I am sorry, my office is suddenly busy. You can follow me on Instagram at the Climate Chaplain, and I'm on Twitter too, but Instagram is a lot more active.
Okay, so here is at the Climate Chaplain.
Oh.
Follow Gabrielle there. Here is Jennifer's website, as well as here is Gabrielle's website. If you want any information from either of our lovely guests, you can go there. Gabrielle's also put together a list of resources. Oh, where did it go? Ooh, in relation to climate grief and anxiety. And you can go here as well. Yeah. Thank you both so much for joining us today for this conversation. This was awesome to have both of you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So on that note, I will just bring up and conclude one other aspect of season 3 of Coastal Insights, and that we have a thought exchange this time. And it's basically a survey that we want all of our viewers, everyone that's watching, to fill out and just answer some pretty simple questions. That'll be, ooh, sorry, 1 sec. Yeah, here we go. Here we go. I will put the survey up right here. It is on a QR code. And so you can either scan this, and yeah, there's just a few questions that will collect that data, and maybe towards the end of the season, we'll present it back and see what kind of answers we got on that survey. But yeah, on that note, that was the conclusion for episode 1 of Coastal Insights Season 3.
Yeah.
And I just want to reemphasize one more time that I was so grateful to have the conversation with both of you guys today. Thank you so much once again.
Yes. And Makai, did you want to talk about the Student Innovation Challenge, which is maybe a thing that we're
Yeah,
maybe going to
well,
do?
I think we need to officially announce that, but I don't think we're doing that this episode quite yet. But there will be an opportunity for students to submit projects for a competition through Raincoast in the coming weeks, and I believe next month. I'm not entirely sure. We'll need to confirm that. But yeah, we'll talk about it more next episode. And speaking of
Stay
next
tuned.
episode,
Stay tuned.
our next episode is about 1 second. Our next episode, the topic is about navigating media in the era of misinformation, which I think is super, super relevant. And I'm really excited to have that conversation as someone who, works in media and uses cameras all the time, how we can, bend narratives to our will, to our advantage. So I think that's going to be a really exciting conversation. But anyways, that concludes today's conversation. So yeah, once again, thank you everyone who's watching on Facebook and YouTube. And thank you to both of our guests once again.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.